it comes to memorizing the Quran, age is never going to be something that stops you or defines whether you can do it or not. That I can assure you. As long as your mind works and your brain works and it functions, you're good to go. I remember when I first came to Malaysia, I visited some school on the outskirts. And I had some younger children ask me, well, one of the children, he got up and an adorable little guy, and he was like, so, you know, if I want to memorize the Quran, what diet should I keep, and, you know, what food should I eat, and what food should I not eat? And I was like, what? Like, because that was the first time I've ever been asked that question. And I was only asked that when I moved here. I didn't move here. No, I didn't have to say that. Okay, so that was the first time I heard that question when I came here, and I didn't know if he was kidding or like if he was being serious. But then, as I spoke at more places, I started having adults ask me the same question. I had someone ask me last night at the teenage conference. They were like, same question. You know, what diet should I follow? What should I eat? What should I not eat? And I told him, and I told a little kid as well, I said, I don't think it would be fair for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to create some kind of food or fruit, right? That like, if you accidentally ate it or if you ate it, you're gonna kind of lose some of your memory, you know? Like, imagine I spent 5 years with the Quran, I put in all this effort, you know, to get where I am, and like I accidentally eat like a green apple instead of like a red one or something, and like I forget 3 juz, right? Like, I would be pretty devastated, you know? And I think it's just more of a cultural thing, it's a myth and people get confused, but you know, there are, you know, it's not to say that there's no food that will help you and your body, right? You guys know carrots are good for your eyes, or that's what people say, right? There's certain foods that are good, like there's certain foods that are good for your heart, certain meats that are good for this, you know, right? You always hear your parents, you know, eat your vegetables, it's going to help you with this, you know, blah, blah, blah. Stay away from sugar, it's going to, you know, affect this. But, you know, beyond that, it's not like there's any kind of food that's actually going to affect your memory to that extent, where like, you're not going to be able to memorize something, or you're going to forget something, or if you eat something, your memory is going to become like, you know, super amazing for like 10 hours, you know, because that's not realistic. Life is not that simple. It's not that easy where you can just eat something and then you can memorize the Quran, and you know, you have to put in effort and time. I mean, the one food that my teacher always told us to eat if you want, you know, to strengthen your mind, not to improve your memory, like, but if you want to strengthen your mind and your brain and have a healthier brain, he used to always tell us to eat almonds, right? He said almonds were good for your brain. But like, he never told us, like, if you want to memorize Surah Baqarah, eat 10 almonds after Fajr, 10 almonds after Dhuhr, and then, you know, in 2 weeks you'll have it. No, that's kind of ridiculous. For memorization, the number one advice I give to people is you have to find a teacher. And as cliche as that sounds, as simple as that sounds, every single person learns things differently, right? Even in school and mathematics, right? Your teacher teaches you things, you get help from her, you get homework. Everyone learns differently. Not everyone is exactly the same, right? So there's no one advice that you can copy and paste for everyone that will work for every single person, right? So the purpose of a teacher is when you're studying with someone that knows what they're doing, that knows what they're talking about, right? They see who you are, what kind of person you are, how you learn, how you adapt, and they give you advice and practical solutions for the kind of person that you are. And so the first step is, if you want to memorize the Quran, I'm talking about memorizing the Quran, okay? Not reading the Quran. If you want to memorize the Quran, and I'm not talking about memorizing like 2-3 surahs, I'm talking about memorizing like the Quran, right? Or like multiple juz, taking it seriously, you need to have a teacher. It's very dangerous to memorize it on your own, or try doing everything on your own. Because when you do things on your own, there's no one to guide you, there's no one to help you out when you get stuck, right? And that gets pretty frustrating. I know this one brother that memorized the Quran in our class. You know, he came when I was finishing. He memorized the Quran in 10 months, okay? He memorized the Quran in 10 months, but he tried doing it on his own for the most part, and he tried understanding it on his own. He used to read a lot of hadith, a lot of tafsir books all on his own, and he tried understanding everything on his own. And the end result for that was he became an atheist. a Hafiz became an atheist, complete, like one of the biggest I know. Like, you cannot argue with this guy, right? But the reason for that is because he tried understanding everything on his own. When something didn't make sense, right, he would just say, you know, this is wrong, it doesn't make sense, or it's incorrect, right? And when you have a teacher, when you get stuck, when something doesn't make sense to you, the teacher, that person is there for you to help you out, to guide you, to pick you up when you fall, right? And that's what a teacher is there for. So when you're memorizing the Quran from that kind of view, or from that point of view, that's why you need a teacher. And then there's also when you're reading, how many of you guys have seen on Facebook, like that, or anywhere, on like they'll have those pictures where they'll write a sentence or like, you know, a few lines with like really weird like letters and numbers, or like they'll skip letters, or like they'll write the word, you know, you're going like with like Y-O, and they'll skip the U and they'll put like R-E, and then like next and they'll put N-X-T without the E, right? The way the human mind works is you don't need every single letter in the word to know what's trying to be said. Your mind will just put it together on its own and you can read it. You know, like, oh, your mind is so amazing if you could read this, you know, share it 10 times. And, you know, if you don't, a kid in Africa will starve, you know? So, that's the same thing with the Quran. When you're memorizing the Quran on your own, when you're reading the Quran on your own, there's going to be times where you read something. You could be someone like mine, you could know how to read the Quran. I'm not talking about someone, I'm talking about someone that's fluent. Like, you can sit there and read it, right? But you can just read one harakah, one accent incorrectly, one letter incorrectly, one word incorrectly, right? And because you read it the first time that way, your mind kind of just went over it. When you memorize it, when it gets stuck in your head that way, every time you come to that ayah or that word, you're going to read it the same way. You're just going to go, even to this day. Sometimes, you know, I've been doing this since I was 9 years old. And sometimes the mistakes I have now are like very tiny mistakes. Like, my teacher used to call them paki mistakes. Like mistakes that you really memorized wrong. Like you really kind of solidified your Quran and memorized it, and you memorized that word, or how it could be something as simple as like a u and an e, right? And you just memorize it as u, but it's actually e, and you were just never aware of it. And whenever you recited it to someone, you might have said it quickly, or they weren't paying attention, and it was just never corrected, right? So, when you read it on your own, when you memorize something, and when you're reciting to yourself, right, because when you memorize on your own, usually people will memorize something, they'll read it, and then they'll recite it to themselves, to like test themselves to see if they know it. You're not gonna correct yourself, and you're not gonna know that you made a mistake unless it's like really wrong, right? But if you memorize something incorrectly, if you think it's right, you're gonna keep going, right? You're not gonna stop, and no one's gonna correct you because you can't see it, you know, it's yourself. So you'll just read it, and you'll repeat it, and you'll think you're reading right, but the entire time will be wrong. That's where a teacher comes into play from that point of view. Your teacher, when you're reciting something, he'll be like, hey, you know, it's actually like this. And you'll be like, oh, okay, you know, whoops, I, you know, kind of did that wrong. And he'll correct it, and then from there you'll know what the mistake is, and then you won't make that mistake, and it'll help you with your Quran later on, right? So the first practical advice is if you want to do something and you want to memorize the Quran seriously, on a serious note, not just few surahs or ayahs or whatever, then you need a teacher. The second bit of advice is you need to put in time. There's no way you're going to memorize any part of the Quran without putting in time. If you're putting in 15 minutes a day, you can't expect to memorize the Quran in 3 years. When I was memorizing the Quran, it took me 3 years. 3 years, and I was doing it full time from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. That's a lot of hours. I started when I was 9. From 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. That's all day. Just Quran, 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 Quran. And it took me 3 years. So if you're putting in an hour a day, how long do you think it's going to take you? So if you're serious about it, if you actually want to memorize the Quran, inshallah, if you have a long life, you know, normal life, take out a few years, 2, 3 years, 4 years. Just be, you know, sacrifice a few things, few desires, you know, the free time that you have, put in the effort, and then after that, you have the rest of your life to enjoy and reap the benefits of what you know, sowed, or whatever, right? And so, when I was young, like now, and most of you guys are older as well, you get stuck with work, you get stuck with school, you get busy, right? And you don't have that much time to put in all these hours. So the practical thing to do after that is, if you want to memorize the Quran, I would suggest a minimum of 3 hours a day. 3 hours that you might spend watching TV, taking naps, chilling with your friends, whatever it might be. For 3-4 years, take out 3 hours every single day. Right? and just put in that time. Dedicate some time to it. Because if you don't, and if you're inconsistent with it, you're going to forget it. Right? Sometimes when I teach over Skype, I teach students, and stuff like that. I'll have people ask me, I want to memorize the Quran, can I study with you 2 days a day, 2 days a week? Or, 3 days a week, or 1 day a week. The problem with that, especially with younger kids, is if you put 2 days for the Quran, if you dedicate only 2 days to the Quran in like 2-3 hours, then all the days in between that are days that you have to forget what you learned. Right? So if you study only Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to forget everything you learned in those 3 days. And then you're just going to end up getting stuck, going back and repeating and doing the same thing that you've already done once. Just because you didn't do it right the first time, you go back and you have to fix it and do it again, and then you just take more time. You're just wasting your time. So if you do it, take out time and be consistent with it. 5 days a week. Take off the weekends. But still read maybe an hour. 5 days a week. 3-4 years. You'll get somewhere. Right? No one says you have to memorize the Quran in 3 years, otherwise it doesn't count. Right? You can take 10 years. You can take 20 years. It's up to you. So, I was going to get to that. So the thing is, first you have to take out that time. After that, the most important thing after time is revision. Revision. And the reason why revision is important, and it's actually more important than memorizing, is because let's say you memorize 5 juz. Right? You memorize 5 juz. There's some people, and I'm speaking as a teacher, and I remember when I was young, some people, they just care about how it sounds. Like, oh, I finished 3 pages today, I finished 10 juz in 2 weeks, MashaAllah, you memorized the Quran in 3 months. It's so amazing, that's such a miraculous thing, Allah SWT rewarded. But what's so cool about memorizing the Quran in 3 months? Why is that something to be proud of? Right? The faster you learn something, right? You remember, even for relationships, what do they say? The quicker you get into something, the quicker, what? It goes away. Right? If you do everything at once, right? This guy. If you do everything at once, then it's going to be quicker to leave you. Right? The person that spends 1 page a day, 5 years, puts in that time and effort and sweat and takes it slowly and really, really focuses on that little that he has every day, compared to the guy that finishes in 5 months, who do you think is going to have a better Quran in 10 years? Right? So, with me, with our teacher, what he did, we read so much Quran, and after I finished memorizing the Quran in 3 years, right, I spent 2 years just revising. I was already a Hafiz. I wasn't memorizing another Quran, I was already a Hafiz. I'm just reviewing, repeating, strengthening. And alhamdulillah, I got to a point where now, I don't have to, I'm not saying it, I don't have to touch the Quran the entire year until Ramadan comes, and I'll still remember it. I won't forget it. Unless I eat like durian or something. I'm just kidding. There's no food. That's why I'm saying there's no food that will actually do that to you, But you can read, I can go the whole year without, reviewing, and I'll still know my Quran. Why? Because I rooted it. It's part of it's in my brain. It's kind of like forced in there. Because the more you repeat something, the more, how they say, there's that one saying, I don't know what culture it comes from, they say if there's a little driplet of water, just a little driplet of water like on a rock, over time it will create like a hole in it, right? Because it's just a little bit at a time, and eventually you'll have an impact, right? Compared to taking a bucket of water and just emptying it on the rock, and it's not really going to do anything. But over time, over years, every droplet's going to count. So that time that you put in, that effort that you put in, that revision, that's what's going to help you with your Quran. So for me, nowadays, I'm busy. I have work, I have school just like you guys. But thanks to the fact that I spent so much time when I was younger, I don't have to review that much or read that much for it to stay in my mind. The best time, and my teacher always used to tell us, for most Hufaz, the best time of year, the one thing that always kind of, if we start going down, that brings us back to where we're at, is Ramadan, in Tarawih. Because you have to lead prayer and you have to recite the whole Quran in Salah. Right? That's a pretty challenging thing. You have to stand there every day, recite a juz, you don't make mistakes. So it kind of refreshes it every year. It's sort of like the yearly refreshment, or that brings back the Quran. But if you're someone where your Quran is weak, then it depends on you and how well you know your Quran. If you know your Quran is really weak, then you need to be spending more time. If it's pretty good, then you spend as much time as you think you need to give. And that's just for memorization. I'm not talking about like if you memorize the Quran, you don't have to read the Quran or spend any time studying the Quran. Because there's a difference between studying it, understanding it, and doing all these other things and just keeping it in your mind, like the memorized parts. That's two separate things. So for you guys, the most important thing when you're memorizing, if you're trying to memorize, if your goal is 5 juz or 3 surahs or 4 or 5 surahs, when you memorize that first surah, do not go to the second surah unless you know that surah without any mistakes, where you're completely confident. Because I remember when I was teaching in Dallas, and when I first started teaching, there was this young girl, she was 10 years old. She comes to me, she's already memorized 10 juz. But she memorized it at home. She was 10, she memorized 10 juz, she was memorizing it at home. She didn't really have a teacher. She was just focusing on memorizing as much as she could. And what happened? When she came to me, instead of memorizing and going to the 11th juz, the whole time she was with me, she was just spending, going back and fixing those 10 juz. And fixing her mistakes, and taking out her mistakes. And the number one problem in the Quran, or when you memorize anything, is memorize it properly the first time, and right the first time, because that's what gets stuck in your head. It's a lot harder to memorize something, and then you have all these mistakes, and then you have to go back and like unroot it from your mind and replace it with something else and fix it because it's already there. You're used to it. You're just making it harder on yourself. So if you're gonna do it the first time, do it properly. So don't focus on finishing as much as you can. Do as much as you can and revise it and solidify it and strengthen it. And when you're confident in it, that's when you go to the next surah, next ayah, next page. And that's how you're gonna build a better Quran. And the last bit of advice is, try not to memorize too much at once. Some people say, how much should I memorize a day? Okay? For me, someone that was in the masjid from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening, that's a lot of hours. Our teacher used to just make us memorize 1 page. That doesn't mean I wasn't able to memorize more than 1 page. I could memorize 10 pages at one point if I wanted to a day. Right? But what happens? As I said, the quicker you do something, the faster you rush something, the faster it leaves. So if you focus and you give yourself a small portion every day, a realistic amount, right? And you do that every single day and you're consistent with it, it's going to help you on the long run. So I hope that answers any questions for memorization, revision. Oh, and I forgot to touch upon, if you want to read the Quran, like I know there's some people that just want to improve their reading, become more fluent, whatnot. That's a different thing than memorizing the Quran. For that, obviously you don't have to spend as much time. You can do that in your free time when you're driving, when you have, you're in between classes, and with free time, just open the Quran, just read it, practice it. That's up to you. That you could do that however you like, whatever you think will help you. That's a little easier. But when it comes to memorizing, there's a lot more procedures that have to be taken. It's a lot more difficult.